Hello, my name is Arnie Herz, and welcome to Habits of a Whole Heart podcast on the Humanity Matters series. Today, I'm very fortunate to have with me an old friend, former Congressman Steve Israel, who is one of the most interesting people I've ever met. Steve not only was at the highest levels of power in the U.S. government in Congress, I believe 16 years, and as Steve likes to say, undefeated and unindicted, has a tremendous sense of humor. He's been in the room for some of the most important decisions that the United States was engaged with for those 16 years that he was in Congress. And after leaving Congress, Steve is now the director of the Cornell Global Institute and is doing some amazing work there. But what most interests me is how Steve, after leaving Congress, opened his own bookstore in Oyster Bay called Theodore's. And it's an amazing bookstore. And Steve is an avid reader. And one of the things that he often talks about is stoicism. And so we're going to look at mindfulness, stoicism through the prism of the political system and society today. And so, Steve, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you. So, Steve, we are living in a time of great reactivity, polarization, fragmentation. And so what would leadership look like if our elected officials were grounded in a sense of stillness, clarity, and discipline?
Well, let me give further definition to the times we're living in. One of the lessons that I learned, Arnie, as a member of Congress, particularly serving on the Armed Services Committee, which has jurisdiction for our military and how we deal with the nature of threat and conflict, was this. When the U.S. military gives an issue an acronym, pay attention. Because there are so many issues that swirl around and bear upon members of Congress and any kind of policy leaders that it's hard for an issue to break through. The U.S. Army War College gave our times, our present condition, an acronym, and it's VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And if that doesn't define the state of the union, the world, our neighborhoods, our families, I don't know what does. When you're in particularly volatile, chaotic times, the propensity, I think, of most is to do one of two things: observe, sit back, hope it works out, disengage, tune it out because it's too stressful, or react. Right now, many of our leaders, not all, but many of them are reacting because our politics with social media, cable television, communications technologies are built for reaction. Our political system is built to react either by going further to the left or further to the right, by posting something on social media that reflects an instant position, but the reflection involves very little actual reflection. And so I, as a member of Congress, facing this VUCA, decided that I just needed a how-to manual on how to operate in chaotic times. And I went on a kind of a journey where I began studying how other leaders managed other VUCA times. There's nothing new about VUCA. VUCA has been with us since the beginning. And that led me to the notion, whether it's stoicism or contemplative practices, breathing, meditation, the wilderness. Right now, I'm doing a lot of work on how nature tends to elevate our discourse. I learned that leadership at the best levels requires you to go not further to the left or further to the right, but deeper into yourself. You need to be grounded. You need to not react, but reflect. You need not to make a statement and issue a press release, instantaneously, but engage in a more contemplative analysis of what's happening. You need to be driven, and I'll final point on this. You need to be driven not by what's called the mean ego, the angry ego, the reactive ego. You need to be driven by a greater sense of your own capacities, your own values, and I know it sounds cliche, but rise above it. So basically, you got to go deeper and you got to go a little higher. Now, some of my former colleagues do that. Some of my former colleagues are trying to find those spaces and work on those paradigms. But it is very, very difficult in a system that's built against those paradigms.
Yeah, it's very profound. And were you able to put that into practice when you were in Congress?
I'll be very honest. I served in the House of Representatives for 16 years, rose to into the Democratic leadership in the House of Representatives. I was trained for the effective strategies and tactics to respond to political challenge or opportunity. If we had opportunity, how do we exploit it? If we had challenge, how do we defend against it? So, I was there for 16 years, and for most of that time, no, I didn't have the physical time to read Marcus Aurelius or read Stoicism, nor did I have the inclination to do those things because I wasn't trained to do that. I was trained as a political warrior, as a combatant, not as somebody who thinks. But then I learned an amazing lesson from our military. I learned that because I was on the Armed Services Committee, that at the highest level, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff, our military leaders and warriors were practicing meditation because it made them think more clearly. It made them think more crisply. It actually, there's a sense where you meditate and, you do all this goo alfalfa stuff that plays well on the West Coast. No, actually, I was taught by our military leaders that it made our warriors think better. When you're in a kinetic situation, the human impulse is to kick in the door. And as one general told me in Iraq, went there 20 times, Iraq and Afghanistan 20 times. I had heard that this one general was practicing meditation, and I asked him about it, and he said, Congressman, he goes, sometimes the alternative to kicking in a door is knocking because it calms things down. And he said, and it makes our warriors safer. So we train them to knock sometimes, right? To diffuse the level of threat, not just because it's good practice, but because it makes them safer. It can create a slightly safer condition. Not all the time. Sometimes the bad guys were, you knock, the bad guys were good. They're here. We'll shoot. So you have to be strategic about that. And so when I heard from that general, that's when I turned to Marcus Aurelius. That's when I started taking hikes in the Grand Canyon. That's when I started meeting with many of my colleagues and introduced practices, including bringing Deepak Chopra to the Hill for a joint bipartisan meditation where he trained us how to meditate.
How did that work out?
Well, I was disappointed because we only had 6 members of Congress come. And I think part of that was a reflection of, oh gosh, first of all, I'm too busy to meditate, too busy to meditate. I can't get into myself. I got to figure out how to raise the next dollar or win the next election or get this bill passed. And I'm not being pejorative. I mean, that's what you have to do as a member of Congress. You want to make a difference. And some, said to me, really, is this what you want me to do? You want me to meditate? That's a little too alien to me. And so we had 6, but I'll tell you, those 6 became ambassadors for us in talking about meditation. And when the military validated it, then it became more accepted among many of my colleagues. And many of them do. They may not tell you they do, but I will tell you, many of them do. And finally, it doesn't have to be meditation. There was something that a colleague of mine who I'm still is a dear friend, and I do work with him on this issue. Tim Ryan, congressman from Youngstown, Ohio, who wrote books about mindfulness and meditation. He ran against J.D. Vance for the Senate and lost. And then J.D. becomes vice president. He's created something called the Quiet Caucus, a place that members can go to, not to give speeches, but to listen to one another. And then one of the most popular rooms in the Capitol, one of the best kept secrets, is the chapel. It's non-denominational, where members can go and just be close to God or to the divine or whatever it is that they need to be close to. So it does spread in various ways.
I like what you said about being quiet. So my last guest a few weeks ago was Dr. Valentin Fuster, who is a giant in cardiology. He's the GOAT. And Mount Sinai renamed their hospital called the Fuster Heart Hospital. And even Sesame Street made a character after him. And he said he's 83 years old. He gets to the office every day, 5 a.m., and he just sits for 15 minutes to reflect. And he also asks himself the question, what does it mean to be a human being? And you're doing something similar here. It's really quite extraordinary. And it's what one thing I'll often say is that the fastest way to getting where you're going is to slow it down.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's true. And I now have the luxury, now that I'm out of Congress, I'm off that treadmill, and I've been able to slow down. And I used to do 40 events, well, not 40, but certainly 20 events a day to try and get votes. Now I operate in a bookstore and I try and sell books. I'm not interested in a social media post. I'm interested in 300 pages. And then the newest thing I'm doing, which I love so much, is I'm learning about the science of awe and nature, and how, from a neurophysiological perspective, it elevates civic discourse. And I'm now working with members of Congress to introduce them to this concept of using the science of nature and awe to elevate their discourse. And there are a bunch of books out on this, and the science is empirical on this. When you take a walk in the woods, you find this moment of awe. Immediately your fight or flight instincts begin to reduce. The amount of stress related cortisol and adrenaline begins to slow down and replaced by oxytocin and dopamine, which are natural highs. And you realize that there's something bigger than you. Your ego, mean ego, dissipates. And you're in a much better position to begin collaborating. Your critical thinking improves. Your memory improves. And that's what I think we need to focus on.
Steve, it's amazing. And I just want to say for our guests, your idea of slowing down is still an incredibly busy life, running the Cornell Global Institute. You just came out with a book, The Einstein Conspiracy, which is an amazing book. And I know I moderated a conversation for you a few weeks ago at someone's home. And so you have a very, very busy life, and you could easily be caught up in the nonstop, but you're stopping and you're pausing. Three things about the nature, which is fascinating. One, I do a daily Torah class, and today we were talking about awe, that the whole purpose of Torah, is to create a sense of awe. And what does awe mean? That's literally what I was talking about an hour and a half ago. Number two, one book that had a huge impact on my life was The Celestine Prophecy. I don't know if you ever read that book, but The Celestine Prophecy talks all about the power of nature. And then I also, when I think of you, I always think of Teddy Roosevelt, who, because you're Oyster Bay, I know you're a huge fan of Teddy Roosevelt. Your bookstore is named after Teddy Roosevelt. And maybe you could connect the dots. My recollection is that after his mother and wife died on the same day, he went off into nature for quite some time. So I just threw a lot out at you. I'll let you absorb and respond.
Yeah. So now here I have to discipline myself because I speak on this around the country. So I'm going to boil it down to a minute and a half for you on this, on how it connects to the divine or God. So there are two scientists, Jonathan Haidt, who we all know, right, wrote The Anxious Generation, and Dr. Keltner began looking at this in 2003, and they gave definition to awe, which aligns with what you talked about in your Torah class. So awe requires two things. Number one, you experience a sudden vastness. Now, it doesn't have to be a landscape. It could be music. It could be a passage in a book. It could be spiritually related or connected. But there is something vast that supersedes your understanding. And the second is what's called a cognitive accommodation. So when you're experiencing that vastness, it requires your mind to begin processing. This is different than anything I've ever encountered. What is this? I need an explanation on this. And that creates literally a neurophysiological response. And that's why when you see awe and you're processing it, sometimes your eyes will get misty. Your throat will clench a little bit. Maybe your heart accelerates. Your vagus nerve, which is having a minute right now in the science, I'm sorry, your vagal nerve, it's enhanced. These are all kind of primitive responses to seeing something big and inexplicable. And it comes in different flavors. It's beauty, seeing an act of virtue, seeing an act of ability. In my case, watching Ohtani play for the Dodgers. That's a supernatural ability that gives me a sense of awe. The supernatural or threat, because awe can be awesome, but it could also be awful. So, those are kind of the flavors of awe. Now, with respect to our spiritual impulses, that is one of the most shared senses of awe. When you feel like you're connecting to God, or prophets, or the divine, however you want to call it, because that is the textbook definition of awe. It's big, it's vast, and your mind wants to understand it, and that creates it deepens your religiosity, your spirituality. It leads very often to epiphany. That's all related in awe.
Steve, it's great. I don't know if first of all, I just want to say about Ohtani, for my son and I as Mets fans, it brings the other side of awe of like, oh God, will the Mets ever possibly win the World Series?
It's stacked against the entire rest of baseball. We ought to just tell the Dodgers, don't even bother. Take the summer off. We'll see you in October.
But it is something about sports and people who just exceed all possible limits. To bring it up, one thing that I think I think we've talked about this, but I'm not sure, is the work of Dan Kahneman with the Thinking Fast and Slow and Two Brains. And I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you, does the awe trigger us out of the fast brain into the slow brain, as does, of course, meditation?
So that experience of awe, and if not awe, elevation, and if not elevation, contemplation, those experiences do take us out of that fast, reactive, ego-driven mind and put us in a higher place. And just as a politician, as somebody who I wanted to win elections, I always wanted to be in a higher place. It made me sharper. It made me think more clearly, as we talked about with the military. I always wanted to think with that part of my brain that gave me a competitive edge because I was clearer that day. I wasn't making decisions based on, boom, I've got to react to this. My ego's telling me that my opponents insulted me, and so I've got to react to this. No, 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 no. Whether it's in corporate life or political life or in the military, or just trying to run a complicated, chaotic household, slowing down gives you edge. It gives you competitive advantage and mental health advantages. And that slowing down is, and this I think is super important, it's whatever you want it to be. For some people, it's transcendental meditation for 20 minutes, 2 times a day. For others, it's a breathing exercise for a minute. For me, it's my own curated meditation, but also walking outside my house. And I'm very lucky because I'm surrounded by trees and a bird sanctuary. And literally for 10 minutes, thinking about my day, but aligning it to the wilderness and the nature, because I'm reminded by the trees and the birds and the plants, which are living, sentient things, although there's more science that that's involved in that. They remind me that the world is much bigger than, oh God, I got to get ready for Arnie Herz's podcast.
That should have made you nervous. So Steve, I love it. And I also wonder if, like painting, one thing I read recently was how Winston Churchill was unbelievably painting all the time. And it puts you into a different flow and a different mindset. So bringing it back to the beginning and trying to explain to members of Congress, it seems for people very cognitive, it's to understand, look, you got two brains, you got the fast brain and you got the slow brain. The fast brain has these benefits and the slow brain has these benefits, and you need them both. And if you're always in the fast brain, you're going to be selling yourself short. It would be like going back to the Ohtani thing and saying he's just going to pitch, he's not going to hit, or vice versa. It's like, be like Ohtani, use both brains.
Leadership and mental health depends on using both brains. And that's why we have both brains. I mean, yes, they were built as a kind of, as to give us capabilities in primitive times, right? When we were tribal society, but they stayed with us. The problem we have now, and I see it infecting our politics, is that we are slowly losing our willingness to spend time and to listen to the inner voices that are coming from our slow brain, because we just have to outshout somebody with whom we disagree. And that's where those inner voices become so indispensable.
So Steve, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to pivot here to a different point. And you just mentioned about taking the time to listen to the inner voice and slow down. And one thing that strikes me about you is how you've been able to maintain friendships with people who completely disagree with you. You're not one of these guys who lives in a bubble and people, not just Republicans, but people you strongly disagree with. And you've brought that together. And I think it's wondering the connection between being able to listen to your own inner stillness and your own inner voice and your ability to listen to other people. How would you connect that?
Well, I don't want to overplay my hand. Certainly there are people in Congress, particularly on the other side of the aisle, who would tell you I'm the world's biggest jerk, and that's fine because, if you're in Congress, you got to have sharp elbows. But I do, of everything I hear from my colleagues and former colleagues, the thing that gives me most value is you're a good guy. I was talking to texting back and forth with a very high-profile Republican yesterday with whom I have zero disagreement on most key issues. Agreement on some issues, but the majority of issues we disagree. And I asked him if it would be okay for me to come visit, and his response was easy to do. You're a good guy. And so how do you do that? I think you have to listen a little bit more to your inner voice. So when you come upon somebody with a view that you find disagreeable, do something that I think is that Malcolm Gladwell talks about. I just interviewed Malcolm Gladwell recently at one of our bookstore events, and he said something that I love. Hold your ideas loosely. That doesn't mean surrender them. Keep your values, but hold your ideas loosely, because that creates space for somebody to arrive at some common ground. And I think that is vital to any reputation, is treat people it's the fundamentals. Treat people with respect. Don't force your opinion on them. Listen more, slow down, listen more, talk less. And that's how you build relationships with people with whom you may disagree. And boy, does our politics need that more than anything else right now. More relationships between people who may have ideological disagreements.
That's phenomenal. I mean, I don't think we have time. I know you told an incredible story about Jesse Helms, that when you first were in Congress and how you really If you have 2 minutes, if you could just.
Well, I don't want to tell the Jesse Helms story, but I will tell you the one moment that was my epiphany, and I'll do this in less than 2 minutes. I was in mortal combat, in verbal combat with a Republican on the floor of the House once. And we were really going at it, me on the Democratic side into the mic and him on the Republican side into the mic. And it got very heated. And our time had elapsed, as the speaker said. And I was walking off, and all of a sudden I feel a hand clamp my shoulder and spin me around. And it's this member. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he wants to fight. And I'm not one of those, I don't fight. I will watch fights, but I don't fight. And he goes, let's go outside. And I'm thinking, he's taking me outside the building for a fist fight. Now, off the side of the House of Representatives is something called the members' balcony. And it is only for members of Congress. You can't get on that balcony unless you're a member. And that's where members, I used to call it America's front porch, because you would step off the floor onto that balcony, sit on cheap, like IKEA furniture, and just talk not as Republicans and Democrats, but as Americans. And this guy sits next to me and he goes, did you see the schedule of votes this week? And I said, yeah. He said, did you see we're going to be here on Saturday voting? I said, yeah. He said, yeah. And then his eyes tear up. He said, I just had to call my son to tell him I was going to miss his high school graduation this Saturday. And you got the brunt of that conversation. I'm sorry. And he and I became really close friends, because I realized just a human being under extraordinary pressure, and so am I. We both let our egos create the narrative on that House floor, but on the balcony, we allowed our inner voices to intersect. And that's the key to saving our politics in America, I think, those kinds of conversations.
Steve, this is amazing. Incredible episode. Great note to end on. And I just want to thank you for the wisdom you bring to the world, the leadership you're bringing through academia right now, through your books, and through all the work that you're doing, and to try to influence Congress and people in positions of power, to give them back their power, their true power, which is this slower brain. So thank you very much for being on. And for our guests, thank you for tuning in to Habits of a Whole Heart as part of the Humanity Matters podcast series. And this is actually, I believe, episode 500 as part of the Humanity Matters series. That's what Bernie was telling me before he was taking off. And it's quite a milestone for this series. This is the 44th episode of my podcast. Really appreciate everyone tuning in, spreading the word. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and all the major outlets. And Steve, once again, thank you very much. And everyone have a great day.